So I entitled this Mother Knows Best, and it's something that has come about in terms of my learning of the texts themselves. So um, really our starting point is the conversation around matrilineal descent. Okay, so that's sort of where I would start at. When we read through Tanakh, it seems very clear that we're talking about a patriarchal tribal system in Tanakh, from father to son, from father to Avraham, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, and so on and so forth. And yet you get to a Mishnah in Kiddushin, ironically, which is what we were studying back after Pesach last year. We were learning Masechet Kiddushin. It's near the end, where we have a Mishnah that tells us that in certain cases, the child's status goes after the father. In certain cases, the child's status goes after the mother. Okay. I'm just going to try to pull up I don't have to look at myself, so I'll try to pull up my source sheet over here. No.
Yeah.
It's okay, Arthur. We'll pick it out together. So let's see if we could do this. So my source sheet is not set up so amazingly well, and actually, ironically, the people here wouldn't be able to see it. Okay. So the Mishnah says any time where anytime somebody gets married or is mikadesh and there's no violation of any sort of terms, havlad holech achar hazachar, the child follows the father's status. So we would say if a Jew marries a Jew, it's valid, right? And so therefore the status of the child goes after the father. And what's the practical definition of the child? It's not Jewish, right? But what would be the significant definition? What? Exactly, right? Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael would follow, right? So the Mishnah then says, Veza zo kohenet Leviya v'Yisraelit shenasu lekohen Levi liYisrael, right? So if you are a Yisraelit, right, you're like me, but female in that you don't really have status, but you marry somebody who's a Kohen, probably with the last name, right? Your children are Kohanim. So it actually follows the father. It says, V'chol makom sheyesh kiddushin v'yesh aveira, anytime there's a kiddushin, but it's in violation, havlad holech achar hapagum, right? The vlad goes after whatever the what's pagum? Like a pagam is a blemish, okay? So what's the situation? It's a widow who gets married to a Kohen Gadol, because Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow or a divorcee or a levirate marriage, but a Kohen Hedyot also can't marry a divorcee or somebody who's on their second marriage, essentially, right? And a mamzeret, if you marry a mamzeret. So those are those situations where it follows the status of the blemished one. Right now, in the case of an almana who's married to a widow who's married to a kohen, so that child is not a kohen, becomes a halal, which technically I think means space nowadays, but like they lose their status as a kohen, which is what's really interesting. I remember I had a friend who grew up who for like most of my life was just a Yisrael like me, and then his bar mitzvah rolled around, and all of a sudden his family discovered they were kohanim. And it's very possible to have Kohanic genetics, but you might have been disqualified religiously at some point, right? But genetically, you are a Kohen, and so now they're a Kohen, and who's going to argue with them, right? Okay. Chol mi she'ein alav kiddushin, anyone who cannot be betrothed, right? So Jewish women could be betrothed, but if they're not Jewish, you can't actually do kiddushin, right? They say that's the word kodesh is part of kiddushin. It has to be, right? Ava yesh la al acherim kiddushin, right? But others could marry her, okay? So I'm sorry, this is a misspeak because could still be Jewish people, right? Who are you not allowed to marry? Like literally speaking, figuratively speaking, almost everybody does. Can't marry your mother, right? You can't marry your father, right? Oh my God, I married my mother, right? Like it's literally you can't. So you can't, since you can't, right? That is a situation where the vlad becomes a mamzer, right? We translate mamzer as a bastard child, but a bastard is obviously something different. But it also implies the father is not, right? So like you don't get the status of the father, right? And what is that? Zaba alachad mikol harayot shebatorah. Anyone who sleeps with any of the forbidden people according to the Torah, right? And so there's a whole list over there, and it's mostly relatives. A nephew cannot marry his aunt, but an uncle apparently can marry his niece. Also rabbinic. And kol mi she'ein la lo alav v'lo alacherim kiddushin. So now we're talking about a non-Jewish person who cannot be betrothed. Havlad kemota. The baby follows her, right? By the way, follows her, meaning a non-Jewish woman who marries a Jewish man or a Jewish woman who marries a non-Jewish man, the status of the child follows the mother. What's that situation? Zevlad shivcha v'nochrit, the child of your handmaid or of a non-Jewish woman, right? And so that is seemingly the starting point, because the Gemara will say, what is the case of nachrit minalan? How do we know that you cannot marry a non-Jew? So it says amakra lo titchaten bam. Okay, so this will be as we are moving into the land of Israel, so closer to the end of the story, where we are warned not to marry the women of the land, right? And it's sort of around the story of Midian, the Midianite women, and Ashkechana delot tafsi bakdushe. So what we see from there is that you actually can't legally marry them, right? Because if your parents say don't marry that person, and then you go ahead and marry them, you still don't have your parents' blessing. So as far as your parents are concerned, you might not really be married, right? They might write you out of the will, whatever it is, right? But like on a technical level, Vlada kamotam minalan, how do we know that the baby follows the mother? Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, says, Da'amarkra ki yasir et bincha me'acharai. When you remove your child from behind me, bincha ba mi-Yisraelit koroi bincha. If your son who comes from a Jewess is called your son, ve'ein bincha haba min hanochrit koroi bincha ela binna, right? So the fact that when you hide your child from me, right, in that quote, I should have put the citation of where that is, but when you hide your child from me, it says your child, right? And since it's directly to you, what do we consider your versus hers, right? So that there's a kinship in yours because I'm talking to you, right? Versus hers, she's not in the room, right? And so that's how we end up concluding. And then there's that's where we get this. That's really sort of the first conversation around matrilineal descent, and it's first codified by Rambam. Okay, so Rambam is 12th century, late 12th century, I believe, and he writes the first, not the first, but really one of the first definitive codexes. Codexes like, right, books of laws. I didn't know what it was, so I was just clarifying. When the first time I heard a codex, I was like, really? Like, I wonder if that's where my name comes from. It's not. Well, that's good. Yeah, it sounded like it. And and Rambam codifies it as zehaklal. This is the rule: ben haba min ha'eved, a child that is born of a slave. O mina akum, from a non-Jew. Akum is avoda kochavim, star worshippers, which is actually a phrase that we see in the early Christian laws. Right, we have that phrase as well. So it's like Zoroastrians, people that are into that type of stuff. O mina shivcha, or from a handmaid. O min bat akum, from the daughter of a non-Jew. Harei hu ki'imo, that child is like its mother. Ve'in mashkichin ala'av, we don't even look for the dad. Right? Lefi davar zeh, according to this, hitir l'mamzer l'sashivcha. If you were a mamzer, you could marry a handmaiden kedei l'taheret banav, sharei hu mishachrer otam v'nimtzeu b'nei chorin. Right? So if you're a mamzer, what's the solution? Is you marry a handmaiden, and then when she gets set free, or if the child gets set free, it's a reset. They become Jewish. That was like old conversion, basically, right? If somebody, you had a servant, you had a slave, and then you set your slave free, right? Like what happened here, like you set the slaves free, they become American citizens. It's not like they go back to where you brought them from. They become part of your community, and so that's how you get rid of mamzerut. You can get it out of the system. The Shulchan Aruch then further reinforces it by saying that Vlad Shivcha v'Nochrit kamotan, the child of a handmaiden or a non-Jew goes after them. Ben shenitavru mi kasher, ben shenitavru mi pasul, whether they became pregnant from a kosher Jew or a pasul Jew or whatever, like a mamzer or a full whatever it is. So that's how we start this conversation around matrilineal descent, right? What is interesting is that we don't really have anything definitive in the Torah, right? As we started off saying, when we go through the Torah, it follows the father, right? Abraham's promise gets passed on to his son Yitzchak. Yitzchak passes it on to Yaakov. Yaakov tries to pass it on to Yosef, right? But when we come into the land of Israel, remember that the Benot Tzlaf complain, what about our portion of land, right? But really it goes through the paternal side, right? It's all patrilineal when it comes to inheritance. Shlomo had a lot of wives, right? And this is like, you can always say like, oh, all of those are stories before we received the Torah, right? You could see Miriam making a big issue out of Moshe marrying Aisha Kushit by saying she's not even Jewish, right? Like, how could you marry her? Your children won't be Jewish. Were Moshe's children Jewish, right? Like Tzipporah was a Midianite, so, right? So all of those, like, yeah, of course they were, like in our minds they were, right? And post Har Sinai, where you actually have laws, right? Like literally, like you don't have to read it into the text. You still have people, like how is Shimshon going around with Delilah? Like he's not even interested. Read the story of Shimshon. Like he's like your classic Jew from the 50s or 60s. He just wants to marry a Gentile, right? Like he has no interest in the Jewish women. And his parents are supportive of him, right? And that's not why she's bad, right? So you get the Torah seems to make it seem like it's very patrilineal. And so there is a major debate going on in Judaism nowadays, that's been going on for a while, around this question of like, can you be born Jewish? And most of the defense, like, the argument against matrilineal descent is yes, what the Torah says, and also post-Nuremberg, right? I was Jewish enough for the trains, but I'm not Jewish enough for your community, is a very powerful statement to be made by people, right? If that guy thought I was Jewish, then who are you to say I'm not? Personally, I think that's the worst way to define Jews. And I think it's the way the Torah does it a lot too, right? Nothing makes us more Jewish than our enemies reminding us that we're Jews, right? So even though we want Judaism to be, or Jewishness to be something that is our own and that we pass on from one to the next, when you go through the Torah, you see that like, what's going on in Shoftim? They sin, so they get punished so that they'll return to God, right? And so it seems like oftentimes we are reminded of who we are, not by ourselves, but by the outsider. And so for all the debates that we have, right, what does it matter who's a Jew when it comes to life and death if they're the ones deciding? But when it's not life and death situation, we like to argue over that. And so that is the line between, where the line is drawn exactly is not clear, but definitely in Reform Judaism, patrilineal descent is acceptable. If your father is Jewish, then you are considered Jewish. The Israeli baseball team holds by that as well, as does the state of Israel, right? As long as you have one parent who is Jewish, you are considered Jewish. It doesn't matter which one. And famously in Orthodox Halacha, it goes after the mother, okay? Which is very confusing considering last names, right? So Seth Myers, You cannot find this online. But Seth Meyers, I think he pulled it, but one of his episodes that he was doing, he showed off a kippah that somebody got for him. And he goes, you should know I'm not Jewish. Like my father's Jewish, but my mother wasn't Jewish, so I'm not Jewish. So but he's saying it halachically, and he knows, right? And had Seth Meyers been born in a different community or at a different time, he might make the argument of I am Jewish, right? So it's just really interesting to see who uses what. We think it's usually like the frum that are going to say you're not Jewish because your mother wasn't Jewish, but I think that there's a lot of Jews who also don't want to be Jewish and will say, well, you don't define me as Jewish, and that's great. I like that. But their last name is Myers, right? It's like pretty Jewish, right? Cohen, right? There's non-Jewish Cohens out there. I think it should be legal. I think in Israel it is.
Kaplan. Kaplan. Kaplan.
Not Jewish.
Not Jewish.
I asked him at one point.
Yeah.
Says, maybe, I don't know.
Right.
There's Irish in us.
Oh, yeah.
He says there's some Irish.
Kaplan's not a very Irish name, though.
Yeah.
But it's the redhead thing. Right. Some Jews.
He's not redhead now. I mean, he could have been redhead back then.
Yeah. Does he have hair?
Yeah.
Is it white or gray?
Oh, gray, white.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
I don't know. I heard a theory that you go white if you have lighter color hair and you go gray if you have darker hair.
I don't know.
Arthur, were you blonde?
I have no idea. I don't think so. Blonde seems to be totally forward to me.
My mom has white hair. She has black hair.
Oh, okay.
Her hair's white.
My science is rabbinic in nature. It's not really science.
Mine's green, so, you know, let's look at this minute.
Oh, sorry, Martha. Father and mother each has input. What does make of Jacob's children? Excellent. And Katz Deli in New York, not Jewish, but that they were, right? Oh, and delis are a great study of, right? Like all the delis in downtown Baltimore. Atman's is still there, right? I taught Shelby Atman. I don't know if she's related, but like now, right? There was Jews in America and religion and Jews in America were not the same, right? It was a very different world. It was you're being a citizen of this country, and religion was more cultural, and you could keep it or you didn't have to keep it. So bagels, cream cheese, and lox, or bagels and a schmear. Okay, I got ya. All right, so again, it's a big debate, and I've always been interested in like the starting point of this, right? Like the question of how do you know, where did matrilineal come from? When it seems very clear if you read Tanakh that it goes like we're a tribal people, right? That you're a Kohen Levi Israel, that if you had inheritance in the land of Israel, went after your father, right? I don't think it mattered if your father married a Jew or a non-Jew. I don't think that your father was going to give up his portion in the land of Israel based on whether or not, right? And so where does it begin? And I don't have an answer.
There's a guy who's a dean of Truro College.
Mhm.
His name is Henry Davis.
Yeah,
And
sure. Yeah. He does online lectures.
He does online lectures, really good lectures.
Mhm.
But I remember he did one lecture on matrilineal descent.
Yeah.
Don't ask me, I'm gonna have to look it up again, but don't ask me what
Okay, getting you
he
on.
said on that. But I think it was, he gave a good reason.
So there's a lot of theories as to why matrilineal descent, and one of the people who comes up with one theory is a historian by the name of Shia Cohen. Shia Cohen in 1985, I think he writes his like dissertation and Shia Cohen's like I've read his stuff and he's a really good historian, and Jewish history and Jewish religion are not, they don't, like the origins of Jewish history were people who wanted to say a lot of the stuff that Jews do and claim as religion is really more of a cultural thing. And because Jews are rejected from society, but really now that Jews are emancipated and part of society, there are a lot of things you need to give up, kosher being one of them, right? And this is the forerunner. Jewish history was a forerunner of the Reform movement because Jewish history wanted to go back and read the sources critically and understand why changes were being made And then if I can tell you the reason why this change was made was because of this, that, and the other, right? Because you could get killed if you married a Christian woman by the Christian government, right? So I would say, don't marry a Christian woman. Like I think most of us would tell our children not to marry a Christian woman if they were going to be put to death as a result of that, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to tear my clothes and sit Shiva. It's, I might have to tear my clothes and sit Shiva if you marry a non-Jewish woman because they're going to put you and her to death, right? And Shaya Cohen claims that actually in the Roman Empire, the status went after the mother. Okay, so he claims that. So in other words, if you're a Roman citizen and you're out at war and you take a woman, you have a child, that child is not a Roman citizen, right? And that child's not going to inherit from the father. It's not so much different from nowadays. Like when, it turns out that the rich person, I just saw a documentary, totally random, about it's a small island, Asian island, and they have, I don't know, but a guy started, he was the illegitimate child of this magnate who had started an airline. And he was really into it because he was the younger child and he learned how to fly planes and he was very involved. And when the father died, he left his estate to his youngest son from the other mother. And so the other brothers sued him, claiming it's not valid. And he lost. So he started a competing airline. And so it's like top notch, but also like no frills, like it's cheaper and it's, I don't know, but Southwest with like a crossover between the old Southwest and the United Arab Emirates type of thing, right? Like really nice seats and like Southwest at the beginning. How about that, right? So it's one of those, that's a situation where like the brothers are like, this guy doesn't, half hour. It's just a half hour now.
Closing in 30 minutes at 8 p.m. and a cleanup has begun. All unattended items will be collected. The restrooms will be locked 10 minutes before closing.
Okay, so we have like 20 minutes till we have to clean up. So, right, so that's just like it exists in our world. We know it exists in our world, but Shaya Cohen claims that up until that moment in time, so Second Temple period, right around the time of the Mishnah, right, is his claim, that we adopted the Roman definitions since we were living in a predominantly Roman society, right? So we have our parallel rules for matrilineal, right? As the Romans do, we also adopt what is essentially matrilineal descent by saying that the status of the child follows the mother and it doesn't follow the father, right? And that encourages Roman citizens to marry Roman citizens, right? And it encourages Jews to marry Jews. And so, right, it's not necessarily keep the bloodline clean, although maybe it is for the Romans, but it's more of like that was the zeitgeist, as they say, right? That's the way things worked at that time. And Shaya Cohen's argument is that Judaism is constantly adapting to the societies in which it lives. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And that's why it gets interesting because like Shaya Cohen would say like, yeah, okay, it's not a problem Jewishly to say it's matrilineal descent nowadays. Just know that it wasn't always that way, right? Like you don't have to not be Orthodox to accept that, although Orthodoxy doesn't believe in time. That's a sort of a big statement, but like Orthodox historiography doesn't really see time, right? Like Moshe, the joke is like Moshe was in the desert with his black hat and his black jacket, right? Like we imagine that there's no distance between us. And that's because the Torah is what kind of creates, right, this sort of time warp. And the Yud-K Vav-K, the YHWH, right, of God is probably a reference to timelessness as well, right? Of Haya, Yiyeh, Hovez is like present. And so timelessness of God and the timelessness of the Torah. And so Avraham, so we can ask a question like, how could Avraham serve the angels, like the goat and the butter, right? And like the answer is because he didn't have a Torah and he came from Mesopotamia and he wasn't Jewish, but we don't say that.
Yeah, but it took him a long time to to shech or to just slaughter the animal.
Oh, nice answer. Yeah. So there was like, right. It was like 3 hours.
Right, yeah, so you put in the butter and the milk.
Right. How long did Avram wait between the milk and the meat? One pasuk. How long is a pasuk? Right. Nice. I like that one. I like that read into it. I remember when I realized that Avram wasn't like Jewish in the sense of like there was no Torah at Har Sinai, right? And so it couldn't be in that definition of a religion has to have a revelation, right? Like just a country has to have a constitution. So like you can't really say that Avram was Jewish in the way that we are because he wasn't, right? We become Jewish at Har Sinai, religiously speaking, right? Yeah, because if Avram was Jewish, then Sarah has to be Jewish.
Who said Sarah isn't?
Has to be, because otherwise Yishmael would also be Jewish, right? If it goes after the father. Okay, so the answer to this question I don't have, but I do have some interesting things that I've been playing around with. I'm very privileged to learn online with people. It's one of my well, right now it's my full-time job, but it's not a full-time job. It's just a side gig, and it's great. If I had a full-time job, this side gig would be a great extra income thing. But I learn online with a bunch of people, and one of them is a younger woman who I started learning with when she was just after university as part of a grant, and we've continued learning. And we're up to the point of Yaakov and Esav. Okay. And you'll see this, like there are other examples in the Tanakh, but the Yaakov and Esav one, I'm just going to focus on a little bit now. And I'm going to just open up my texts for myself to Yaakov and Esav. Let's just make sure Martha's not texting us again. Mother can be okay, there we go. Mother can be known absolutely, especially in the previous time. Good. Yes. Good. So the knowledge of Martha shared with us that the idea of why do we follow the mother is because the mother is always known, whereas the father is not always known. That's also very good. I believe that it was an ancient, well, we know it from ourselves, like from the Tanakh itself, that when you conquered a people, you could take the unwedded wives, right, the women who have known no men, and the children, you take them for yourself, and like they become yours, right? And so that was a way also of like weeding out a people. Like, how do you destroy a people? You kill all the men, and you take the women for yourself. And as a persecuted people historically, what did we respond? We responded, no, it goes after the mother, right? So like try to kill us and take our women, right? Every time you rape a Jewish woman, you create another Jew. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say out loud, right? But sort of defeats the purpose of trying to like destroy, right? Yeah, it's just fascinating on that level. Okay, so let's go into the story. No, that's Avram. And then so we have to go here to the story of Rivka. I'm just pulling it up on my screen and Wi-Fi. Hello, Wi-Fi. Nah. Oh, it just showed up and then I switched away. Okay, Avram ben Tishim, Be'elonei Mamre, Ve'yavo shnei malachim. I'm way off. Va'era. Todo. Okay. So let's start with Toldot. Parsha Toldot is Yitzchak and Rivka, right after Eliezer comes back, or the Eved comes back with Rivka from Aram Naharaim, and we're told that Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham Alidit Yitzchak, and Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Rivka bat Betuel Arami from Padan Aram, not Aram Naharaim, but from Padan Aram, the sister of Lavan, the Aramean, as a wife. Ve'yatar Yitzchak l'Adonai, and there's a prayer. Lenochach ishto, right? Yitzchak prays on behalf of his wife, ki akarahi, for she was barren. Ve'yatar lo, so Adonai, God responds, Vatar Rivka ishto, right? So Rivka becomes pregnant. Okay, And famously, "Vayitrotetzua banim b'kirba," right? She's feeling these like stuff's going on in her belly. They didn't have OBGYN back then, right? And I guess it was confusing for her. And there's no women around, right? Sarah's dead. So who's she supposed to ask? So she goes, she says, "Im kein lama ze anochi," like, oh, I wanted to be pregnant for so long, but like, I didn't know that this was going to happen. And so v'telech lidirosh et Adonai, she goes to seek out God, right? Or with God, whatever it is. It's not so clear what she's doing. There's a midrash that she goes to the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, who are the descendants of Noach, right? And so she goes there because it's drash, the big midrash. Vayomer Adonai, and God says to her, La, Shnei goyim bevitnech, you have two nations in your womb, Ushnei leumim mime'ayich yiparedu, two, again, nations, a different word for nation, will issue forth from your innards. One will overpower the other, and Rav, which usually means greater, is we often translate it as the older, Ya'avod Sa'ir, which we always means the younger, right? So the older child will serve the younger child, okay? She goes the 9 months, and she has twins. And the first one comes out red, and they call him Esav. And then Yaakov comes out holding the ankle, which is why they call him Esav, because Ekev is the ankle. And Yitzchak at this time is 60 years old, which is like, it's the perfect age back then to have a kid. You're a young spring chicken at 60, right? It's like maybe in his 30s. But yeah, like the equivalent of. V'yigdelu naharim, and they grew up, right? And yada yada. V'yehav Yitzchak et Esav. Yitzchak loves Esav. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, right? And Rivka loves Yaakov. Okay. So this is an important thing. One of the things we often forget when we're reading this story, or at least I was reminded of in learning this story, is that there is a prophecy here that is given to Rivka, that is not given to Yitzchak, right? Rivka knows that the Rav Ya'avod et Hatzeir, right? In this case, the Rav meaning the older one, not the rabbi, right? Will serve the younger one. And so as we yada yada and fast forward to the famous story, right, where Yitzchak becomes old and his eyes my eyes are dim, I cannot see, right? And he calls Esav Beno HaGadol, his older son, and he says to him, Bini, and his son says, Hineni, and he says, Hinena zakanti lo yadati yomoti, I'm old, I don't know when I'm going to die, which seems to imply I think I'm going to die. Yitzchak was way off on this because he ends up living for quite some time afterwards, right? But he says, like, go out and get me some food, right? And again, Esav is a daddy's boy, I guess you might say. He's a tough guy. He's hairy, and he hunts in the field, and he's all about, like very typical. Yes, this is the creation of binary in the Torah, by the way, right? And Yaakov is described as a mama's boy. He's ishtam yoshevo alim. He's simple. He dwells in the tents, right? Nowadays, like, I don't know if you have younger kids, like there were no devices back then. A lot of kids are Yoshevo Alim. And of course, famously, what happens is that Rivka hears that Yitzchak is talking to Esav, so she goes to Yaakov and says, Yaakov, you have to go in and get that bracha, right? And it is a major question with, like, how can this happen? Like, how can you steal a blessing, right? Like, let's just go with, like, Jews are the chosen people, and that means that God loves us the best, right? Like, how can you equate chosenness and love with I tricked you into it, right? Like I stole it, right? Like it doesn't seem to go hand in hand, right? Yitzchak wants to give the blessing to his son Esav. And in the end, he's tricked into giving the blessing to Yaakov. Now, to be clear, the blessing that is given to Yaakov and then to Esav is not the promise that was given to Abraham, right? That's actually going to happen later. Yaakov's going to receive that blessing directly from God as well. So there's nothing to talk about in that sense, right? But we can definitely say that this blessing of like, who is the oldest child? Who deserves that firstborn? Who is the one? And in this blessing, Yitzchak says that your brother will serve you, right? So there's that servitude there. And often, like a lot of the Parshanim are really, a lot of our commentaries and definitely outsiders will go, just like they would say, you stole this from us. It really belongs to us. And you guys came along and you did like that Jewish thing where, right? And really like you stole it and it doesn't belong to you. And as my chavruta pointed out to me, and I think like in one way, taking a look at matrilineal descent, we actually see what's going on. If we take that step back, what we see over here is not patrilineal descent, right? It's not Yaakov and Yaakov deciding who's going to get they're both Yaakov's kids, right? But it's not up to, they're both Yitzchak's kids, but it's not up to Yitzchak to decide who's going to get the blessing. Who's the one that holds the keys to the blessing? It's the mother, okay? When you start here, now all of a sudden you go back one generation. How many children does Avram have? Two, right? Ishmael from Rivka's Shivcha Hagar, and Yitzchak, who was born of Sarah, right? Now, when Yitzchak is born, what happens to Ishmael and Hagar? But why? Why are they kicked out?
Because
Who kicks them out?
Sarah kicks them out because Ishmael's a bad influence on Yitzchak.
So says our tradition, right? This is our 15-minute warning, which is our 5-minute warning.
The restrooms will be locked in 5 minutes. If you need to check out materials or print from public computers, please do so now.
Right? So if we go back and we take a look at like in that situation, Sarah says they play a lot with the word sachak, to laugh, right? We don't know which kind of laughter is happening at any point. Sarah laughs when the messengers, these angels, the people tell her that she's going to become pregnant, right? And then it's repeated again, and Avram says laughing, and when Yitzchak's born, they name him Yitzchak, but not because he's a joke. I mean, maybe, but that would be a really mean thing to name your kid. And this is my kid, the joke. Joker would be a different thing, but Yitzchak has very little personality in the Torah, so I don't think he was a joker. But we see over there that Sarah comes along and says Yishmael is laughing, right? Sochek or whatever it is, and says send her away. Now Avraham doesn't want to, and he turns to Hashem and he's like, "What should I do?" And Hashem responds and says, "Shma b'kola, whatever your wife says, you have to listen to her." And what's really cool, I believe this is,
See,
right?
Why do you think I keep saying, yes, dear?
right? And by the way, so God says, listen to Sarah. In the case of Rivka, right, with Yaakov, she says, Va'tabani shma b'koli la'asher mitzavetcha, right? Listen. Oh, cool. Comfort is, yeah, but the Ben Avraham is for the male. So I'm guessing a female is Bat Sarah. And this is, sorry, let me say it out loud. Is this possibly why a convert is called a Bat Sarah? That's for a female convert. And a male convert is called Ben Avraham, right? Visara. But yes. It's really, I have this whole thing on Sarah where it seems like when they went down to Egypt the first time, I have this theory that was when the agreement of lie, like when Sarah lied the first time, was in exchange for equal status with Avraham, right? Sarah was not promised anything by God. Avraham was. And then Avraham was worried when he went to Egypt. So he said, Sarah, if you do this for me, then we'll be equal partners. And then Hashem steps in and goes, look, you're the one that made an agreement with your wife that you were equal partners. Now you have no choice. And that would explain why Yitzchak has to be the child that receives the blessing, because it can't be Ishmael, because Ishmael is not from Sarah's womb. even though he is also Abraham's child. Okay. If you kind of fast forward a little bit again, and these are just some other examples, Yosef is Yaakov's, right? Yosef receives a double blessing. Why? What is this? Who is Yaakov's firstborn? Reuven. And his mother is Leah, right? You got to know that one, right? And Yosef is whose child? Right, Rachel's child. And how does Yaakov feel about these two wives? Which one does he prefer? Right? So even though it's not active, it seems like the determining factor is the mom again, right? It's not Leah's child that's going to get that firstborn status or whatever that means, but it's the preferred wife, right? The chosen wife. And the final example, and there's way more of these, but if you jump ahead to the story of when David HaMelech is on his deathbed, right? Who takes over from him? Right. It's based on Bathsheba. And it's the palace intrigue there is fascinating. It seems the way when you read the story in Sefer Malachim, it seems like it's very similar to the story of Yaakov Esav in that there's something fishy going on there, right? Like King David actually hasn't decided who his heir is going to be. Of course, it's going to be whoever his oldest child is at that moment, because that's the way it always works. And by the way, from that point forward, it's the way it's always going to work, right? It's the oldest child will inherit the throne. But in that situation, you have mom stepping in with the blessing of the Navi, Natan Nachozeh, and Shlomo becomes the legitimate king, even though he has older siblings, right? And it's just, and again, it goes based on like Bathsheba being the preferred wife, right? Of course, Bathsheba was not Jewish, right? No, she was. Her husband wasn't, right?
Yeah, no, it was, right.
He was killed. Like,
Yeah,
killed in war.
but he was not Jewish.
Really? I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure he was. I could be way wrong. My Tanakh is like more recent. And so again, so the mother knows best component and bringing it all back. Like there's nothing definitive in the Torah with regards to like, oh, your religion goes after your mother or your status as a Jew goes after your mother. But there is a maybe even not so subtle theme throughout the stories in Tanakh where it is the mother who determines, right? And so we're almost done. And so that could be actively, right? In the Tanakh, it's usually the mother is taking an active role in that. He was a Hittite. Martha, thank you. Yeah, it was, and yeah. And so it's just an interesting thing. Like, again, not so clear. And so when we think about it as like, what does it matter? I think that the role that, this is a really weird thing to say, but like matrilineal descent in its origin is actually a pretty progressive liberal concept, right? It's breaking with what society had thought until that point in time.
Yeah, because women were like owned. Like, they were not.
Yeah. All right. We're going to clean up over here. Thanks so much for everyone who joined online. Hopefully the audio came out this time, and I'll try to post it on the website. And thanks for giving the thumbs up. And I think next week we're debating if we're on. I do not have next week scheduled because of President's Weekend. However, but primarily because the library is closed.
Oh,
But I'm in conversation with Eitan Mintz about possibly him teaching. And if that's the case, we might end up going down to downtown because he'll give us a space there. So I'll keep you up to date.
oh,
Ending
nice.
stream.
Where did these books go?
The white box.